Famine in Gaza City is failure of humanity, UN chief says. The United Nations chief has described the famine confirmed in Gaza City and its surrounding areas as a failure of humanity. Antonio Guterres said the situation was a man-made disaster after a UN-backed body, which identifies hunger levels around the world, raised its food insecurity status in parts of the territory to Phase 5, the highest and most severe. The Integrated Food Security Phase Classification (IPC) says more than 500,000 people across Gaza are facing catastrophic conditions characterized by starvation, destitution and death. The report was labeled an outright lie by Israel, which has denied there is starvation in the territory. The UN says Israel is continuing to restrict the amount of aid entering Gaza, which Israel also denies. Its denials are in direct contradiction to what more than 100 humanitarian groups, witnesses on the ground, multiple UN bodies, and several of Israel's allies, including the UK, have said. The IPC says that an immediate, at-scale response is needed, or there will be an unacceptable escalation in famine-related deaths. It predicts that between mid-August and the end of September, famine will expand across the Strip to Deir al-Balah and Khan Yunis. Israel tells medics and aid groups to prepare for Gaza City evacuation. My youngest child doesn't know what fruit tastes like. Gaza residents on famine. During this period, almost a third of the population, nearly 641,000 people, are expected to face catastrophic conditions in IPC Phase 5, while the number of people to face emergency conditions in IPC Phase 4 will likely increase to 1.14 million, or 58% of the population. The report also projects that up to June 2026, malnutrition will threaten the lives of 132,000 children aged under 5. Since the start of the war, Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry has reported that 271 people have died of malnutrition, including 112 children. Only 4 previous famines have been classified by the IPC since it was established in 2004, the most recent in Sudan in 2024. The IPC cannot officially declare famine. That is usually done by governments or the United Nations. Reem Tawfiq Kader, 41, a mother of 5 from Gaza City, said, "The declaration of famine came too late, but it is still important. We haven't eaten any protein for 5 months. My youngest child is 4 years old. He doesn't know what fruit and vegetables look or taste like." Rida Hijja, 29, said her 5-year-old daughter Lamia's weight had dropped from 19 kilograms, 42 pounds, to 10.5 kilograms, 23 pounds. She said Lamia was healthy before the war began and had no prior illnesses. "This all happened only because of the famine," she said. "There is simply nothing for the child to eat. There are no vegetables, no fruits." Now Lamia suffers from swelling in her legs, thinning hair and nerve problems, she said. In response to the report, UNAID Chief Tom Fletcher said the famine was entirely preventable, saying food could not get through to the Palestinian territory because of systematic obstruction by Israel. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said, "Just when it seems there are no words left to describe the living hell in Gaza, a new one has been added: famine." He described it as not a mystery, but rather a man-made disaster, a moral indictment, and a failure of humanity itself. He added that Israel has unequivocal obligations under international law, including the duty of ensuring food and medical supplies of the population. Philippe Lazzarini, head of the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA, said, "This is starvation by design and man-made by the government of Israel." UN Human Rights Chief Volker Turk described the famine as a direct result of actions taken by the Israeli government, which has unlawfully restricted the entry of aid. UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy described the famine as a moral outrage. The Israeli government's refusal to allow sufficient aid into Gaza has caused this man-made catastrophe, he wrote on X. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said in a statement, "Israel does not have a policy of starvation. Israel has a policy of preventing starvation. Since the beginning of the war, Israel has enabled 2 million tons of aid to enter the Gaza Strip, over 1 ton of aid per person." In recent months, Israel has come under widespread international condemnation for the aid situation in the Gaza Strip. Last month, after weeks of mounting pressure, the Israeli military said it had airdropped humanitarian aid into Gaza, a move that was criticized at the time by aid agencies as a grotesque distraction. Other aid drops have since taken place, but warnings have been issued about their safety, with reports that civilians were hit and killed by the falling pallets. Earlier this week, BBC Verify found 10 separate occasions where aid was dropped into an area that the Israeli military has explicitly warned people not to enter. In addition to airdrops, Israel said it would designate humanitarian corridors for UN convoys. However, on Tuesday the UN warned that the trickle of aid entering Gaza was insufficient to avert widespread starvation. COGAT, the Israeli military body in charge of aid, says roughly 300 aid trucks are entering daily, but the UN says 600 trucks of supplies a day are needed. The IPC report comes as Israel prepares to launch a new military offensive aimed at occupying Gaza City. Israel's military launched a campaign in Gaza in response to the Hamas-led attack on southern Israel on 7 October 2023, in which about 200 people were killed, and 251 others were taken hostage. At least 122 people have been killed in Gaza since then, according to the territory's Hamas-run health ministry. Most of Gaza's population has also been displaced multiple times. More than 90% of homes are estimated to be damaged or destroyed. And the healthcare, water, sanitation and hygiene systems have. How Israel's policies created famine in Gaza. Famine is taking place in Gaza, just a short drive away from hundreds of trucks of aid, sitting idly outside its borders. How did we get here? The Integrated Food Security Phase Classification (IPC), backed by the United Nations, is the world's leading hunger monitor. Its assessment that 500,000 people, a quarter of Palestinians in Gaza, are suffering from famine, is shocking for many reasons. Primary among them is the report's acknowledgement that this situation is entirely man-made, with aid organizations today accusing Israel of the systematic obstruction of food entering the Gaza Strip. The race for the 2 miles a second superweapons that Putin says turn targets to dust, glinting in the autumn sun on a parade ground in Beijing. The People's Liberation Army missiles moved slowly past the crowd on a fleet of giant camouflaged lorries. Needle-sharp in profile, measuring 11 meters long and weighing 15 tons, each bore the letters and numerals, DF-17. China had just unveiled to the world its arsenal of Dongfeng hypersonic missiles. That was on the 1st of October 2019 at a National Day parade. The US was already aware that these weapons were in development, but since then China has raced ahead with upgrading them. Thanks to their speed and maneuverability, traveling at more than 5 times the speed of sound, they are a formidable weapon, so much so that they could change the way wars are fought, which is why the global contest over developing them is heating up. This is just one component of the wider picture of the emerging geopolitical contest that we're seeing between state actors, says William Freer, a national security fellow at the Council on Geostrategy think tank. It's one we haven't had since the Cold War. Russia, China, the US. A global contest. The Beijing ceremony raised speculation about a possible growing threat posed by China's advancements in hypersonic technology. Today it leads the field in hypersonic missiles, followed by Russia. The US, meanwhile, is playing catch-up while the UK has none. Mr. Freer of the Council on Geostrategy think tank, which received some of its funding from defense industry companies, the Ministry of Defense and others, argues that the reason China and Russia are ahead is relatively simple. They decided to invest a lot of money in these programs quite a few years ago. Meanwhile, for much of the first 2 decades of this century, many Western nations focused on fighting both jihadist-inspired terrorism at home and counterinsurgency wars overseas. Back then, the prospect of having to fight a peer-on-peer conflict against a modern, sophisticated adversary seemed a distant one. The net result is that we failed to notice the massive rise of China as a military power, admitted Sir Alex Younger, soon after retiring as chief of Britain's Secret Intelligence Service in 2020. Other nations are also racing ahead. Israel has a hypersonic missile, the Arrow 3, designed to be an interceptor. Iran has claimed to have hypersonic weapons, and said it launched a hypersonic missile at Israel during their brief but violent 12-day war in June. The weapon did indeed travel at extremely high speed, but it was not thought to be maneuverable enough in flight to class as a true hypersonic. North Korea, meanwhile, has been working on its own version since 2021, and claims to have a viable, working weapon, pictured. The US and UK are now investing in hypersonic missile technology, as are other nations, including France and Japan. The US appears to be strengthening its deterrence, and has debuted its Dark Eagle hypersonic weapon. According to the US Department of Defense, the Dark Eagle brings to mind the power and determination of our country and its army, as it represents the spirit and lethality of the Army and Navy's hypersonic weapon endeavors. But China and Russia are currently far ahead, and according to some experts, this is a potential concern. Hyperfast and hyper-erratic. Hypersonic means something that travels at speeds of Mach 5 or faster. That's 5 times the speed of sound, or 858 miles per hour. This puts them in a different league to something that is just supersonic, meaning traveling at above the speed of sound, 767 miles per hour. And their speed is partially the reason that hypersonic missiles are considered such a threat. The fastest to date is Russian. The Avangard claimed to be able to reach speeds of Mach 27, roughly 2,700 miles per hour, although the figure of around Mach 12, 200 miles per hour, is more often cited, which equates to 2 miles a second. In terms of purely destructive power, however, hypersonic missiles are not hugely different from supersonic or subsonic cruise missiles, according to Mr. Freer. It's the difficulty in detecting, tracking, and intercepting them that really sets them apart. There are basically 2 kinds of hypersonic missile. Boost glide missiles rely on a rocket, like those DF-17 ones in China, to propel them towards and sometimes just above the Earth's atmosphere, from where they then come hurtling down at these incredible speeds. Unlike the more common ballistic missiles, which travel in a fairly predictable arc, a parabolic curve, hypersonic glide vehicles can move in an erratic way, maneuvered in final flight towards their target. Then there are hypersonic cruise missiles, which hug terrain, trying to stay below radar to avoid detection. FBI searches home of Trump advisor turned critic John Bolton. FBI agents have searched the home and office of Donald Trump's ex-national security advisor John Bolton, as part of an apparent investigation into the handling of classified information. The high-profile Republican aide has been a vocal critic of the U.S. president since quitting his first administration in 2019, and was previously accused by the White House of misusing classified information in his 2020 account of working with the president. The FBI has not commented in detail, but sources familiar with Friday's search told CBS News it was related in part to classified documents. Bolton, who is yet to comment on the investigation, has not been detained and no criminal charges have been filed. Asked by reporters what the investigation was about, Trump said he did not want to get involved in the matter, but referred to Bolton as a sleazebag. The president said he had not directly ordered the searches. In an interview with NBC News, Vice President J.D. Vance said classified documents were certainly part of the investigation, and also alluded to broad concern about Bolton, without offering further detail. He said the FBI would only bring a case against Bolton if they determine that he has broken the law, and said the investigation was not politically motivated, as Democratic politicians have claimed. Police vehicles and FBI personnel were seen at Bolton's home in the Washington, D.C. suburb of Bethesda, Maryland on Friday morning, some of whom were seen taking boxes inside the property. In a statement to CBS, the BBC's U.S. partner, the FBI, said it was conducting, quote, authorized activity in the area. FBI agents were also seen at Bolton's office in Washington, D.C. Bolton returned to his Maryland home on Friday afternoon, but did not speak to reporters outside. In 2020, Bolton authored The Room Where It Happened, a memoir recounting his time working in the first Trump administration between 2018 and 2019, which was fiercely critical of the president. In it he wrote that, quote, a mountain of facts demonstrates that Trump is unfit to be president. The Justice Department accused Bolton of a flagrant breach of an agreement to not disclose classified matters, but the lawsuit was dropped in June 2021, by which time Joe Biden was president. Around the time the searches began, FBI Director Kash Patel posted on X, "No one is above the law." The post did not refer to Bolton specifically. Attorney General Pam Bondi shared the post and added, "America's safety isn't negotiable. Justice will be pursued, always." Bolton, who served as George W. Bush's UN ambassador, had his Secret Service protection stripped by the Trump administration in January, along with several other former officials who have clashed with the president. Bolton has also publicly questioned the administration's handling of the war between Ukraine and Russia. Trump has been highly critical of Bolton in public, accusing him of pushing for U.S. military intervention overseas during his time as National Security Advisor. Other Trump adversaries, including New York Attorney General Letitia James and Democratic California Senator Adam Schiff, have also been subjected to investigations since he returned to office.